everybody. Hello. Hello. It's great to see you. Hello, everyone. Hello. Hello. Thank you for coming this morning. This is a crazy time to talk about ghosts. 10:30 in the morning. Let me just ask you before we begin. Anyone here, who here believes in ghosts or the supernatural? Oh, a few. And who does not believe in ghosts or the supernatural? Okay, have you come to the right place? Did you check your ticket, I don't want you to be saying to your partner, you didn't tell me it was about ghosts. It is about ghosts. And I will discuss with you my experiences of the supernatural, how this book came to be, Night Side of the River, really because when I was writing the stories, I also wanted to put in certain encounters that I had, I still have, that I cannot explain, and that I was not prepared to explain away. Sometimes we just have to live in a place of discomfort, and we have to accept that we don't know the answer, or we don't know how to explain something, and not rush to an explanation which closes down the question, but also closes down the discomfort. We just have to say, and as a writer, you especially have to say, I don't know, so I'll wait to find out. Anyway, I'm going to start this morning with a cheery and optimistic thought. We're all going to die. Which, given the state of the world, might not be so bad. Or anyway, we're not going to be able to avoid it, are we? With our new enemies across the Atlantic. Little fuckers, honestly. Anyway, how dare that man come here and talk to you in the way that he did? Anyway, never mind, let's get on. Okay, we agree, humans die. Then what? So I want you to think about religion as the world's first disruptive startup. They didn't invent everything in Silicon Valley. It's just that they don't know any history or culture. So they all think it's all about them. It's not. So along comes religion, the world's first disruptive startup. And what's being disrupted is death. So you think about the Egyptians and those elaborate death rituals, the tombs designed to help the soul of the individual go forward on its dark voyage. The future beyond the grave was imagined by the Egyptians as a version of everyday life. Pots, pans, weapons, clothes, even animals would be necessary as the soul moved from this plane to the plane of light. Now, you know that Homo sapiens has been around for about 300,000 years, which is a salami slice of space-time. And we began to bury our dead about 100,000 years ago. And we now believe that Neanderthals were also burying their dead around 130,000 years ago. And burial is respect. It's a huge move in consciousness because animals, of course, don't bury their dead. When humans begin to do that, what's happening? Well, what's happening is commemoration. It's memory. You were here and I love you. Or you were here and I hated you, but I'll bury you anyway. At least then I know where you are. So burial marks an ending, and the undead, or the ghastly ghosts resurrected, they're terrifying, not only for their spectral presence, but because their appearance overturns the natural order of things. A ghost is a transgression. But, fearful as this is, part of us does want the dead to return. Because the promise of religion, that disruptive startup, is that death is not the end of life. We shall be reunited with those we have lost. And remember Damien Hirst and the pickled shark, the one that's in formaldehyde. And he called it the impossibility of death in the mind of someone living. So is our psychological problem one of acceptance? Death's absurd, especially if it's a young person, especially if the person is still full of life. And yet physical death was everywhere present for most of human history. No one was a stranger to death. Their children, their loved ones, life expectancy was short, and the world was dangerous and brutal. Well, it's still dangerous and brutal. But we do live longer. And the difference between us and our ancestors is that we have sanitized our relationship with death. And many people living today have not seen a dead body. But in spite of the distance between us and death, that distance between the living and the dead is a gap that we seek to close, because anyone who's ever lost a loved one cannot help say, "Where are you?" And humans find it hard to imagine nothing, nowhere. And we bury our dead to give them a home, a last resting place. Even the casket of ashes that follows cremation is a container, a mini-home. And some people keep their loved ones on the mantelpiece, and others take them on holiday. Where are you? It's a question we've always wanted to answer, because we assume that the dead, like the rest of us, need somewhere to live. So in the Christian scenario, as you know, the saved go to heaven and the damned go to hell. And this is comforting, well, or not, depending on the likelihood of the destination. But it is restrictive, particularly for ghosts. So a one-stop abode for the righteous and another for the wicked has always posed a psychological problem for the vast paraphernalia of the afterlife that has collected and accreted over millennia. Everybody knows about lonely wastelands, gloomy groves, crime scenes, houses, individuals, where we say something's haunted there. And objects themselves have always been subject to unexplained, supernatural force, things moving around by themselves. And was this driven by the devil? Well, yes, if hell was one of two possible destinations. But you see, the Catholic Church has never been short of a good idea. And extending the territory for the dead, and allowing, therefore, the reasonable idea that the dead might return from time to time, was managed not through heaven and hell, it's up or down for you, lady, but for the ideas of purgatory and limbo. So in the same way that the Christian Church appropriated pagan feast days for its Christian festivals, allowing folks to feel connected to instead of displaced from the new religion, these psychic geographies of limbo and purgatory gave the dead new realms to live in, a new place to go. And it neatly solved the problem of what had happened to all those good people living as best they could before the birth of Christ. Not fair, was it? It wasn't fair. And Dante, in the Divine Comedy, 1320, he situates limbo as the first circle of the Inferno, and that's because, as you know, limbus is Latin for edge. So limbo is just outside the boundary of hell proper. You know, it's like having some rather nice houses a bit too close to an inner city no-go zone. You know, it's stacked with burning cars and drug addicts and residents who eat each other. But it was spacious and it was gracious. And limbo was home to those who could never get to heaven, but would never suffer the torments of hell either. So virtuous pagans, some Islamic scholars, they lived in limbo. And their neighbours were unbaptised persons, especially babies and children, who presumably enjoyed perpetual childcare. In limbo, virtuous Jews had their own section of the castle and grounds, according to Dante, though some Jews had ascended to heaven already by the time Dante got down to writing the poem, thanks to the harrowing of hell. You remember Christ's visit to the underworld after his crucifixion and before the resurrection. And that was a mission to rescue some of his own people, the Jews. If you look up harrowing of hell, if you Google harrowing of hell, you get the paintings, and then helpfully underneath it says, shop for harrowing of hell. I told you they didn't have any culture in Silicon Valley. But you know, there's nothing in the Bible about limbo. Nothing. Doesn't exist, doesn't appear. But it lasted in the Catholic consciousness until 2007, when limbo was officially closed down by the Pope. And the children who lived there were rehomed in heaven, again by papal decree. And I'm not sure what happened to the other evacuated residents. They didn't say. But the Catholic Church has always owned a lot of property. And I guess your landlord has the right to turn you out. Purgatory, though, is still there if you're a Catholic, and it's a desirable destination, and it offers as much space as the dead will ever need, because technically it's a process, not a place. It's a process of purification, and one that involves as much suffering as the soul can stand, but suffering that can be relieved if there are enough helpful relatives and friends on earth with enough cash to pay for long masses and large donations to the church. But meanwhile, it makes sense for these souls who are temporarily lost property to come visiting their friends or their enemies, or generally hanging about and upsetting the dog and looking miserable, as ghosts have always done. But you know, the Protestants, they're really party poopers, aren't they, the Protestants? I mean, they just didn't want any fun. And of course, they didn't care about limbo and purgatory, and Puritans detested such ideas. It had to be as miserable as possible at all times. So after the Reformation, 1517, Martin Luther, there's a twist in the tale for ghosts. So the idea that the saved would never leave heaven and the damned could never leave hell was a bit of a problem, because it meant that somebody appearing as your dead grandma could only be a demon in disguise. And efforts to keep ghosts in their place were bolstered by scientific advancement. In the West, we still call it the Enlightenment. Never mind. From the late 1600s onwards, science cut out alchemy, mysticism, and prioritized reason, skepticism, experiments with repeatable results. So a visit from your dead grandma didn't count as a repeatable result, unless she appeared every night, in which case you could make a fortune. No, any visitation had to be a result of fever, pox, lead poisoning, mouldy bread, too much drink, or a bad dinner. And you remember, in Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol, the world's most favourite, best-loved ghost story, even the Muppet version. And that's 1848. Remember that Scrooge tries to dismiss the apparition of his business partner, Jacob Marley, with the line, "There's more of gravy than grave about you." But in spite of the Protestant and Puritan theologians, in spite of the rationalists and the scientists, ordinary folk carried on believing what they wanted to believe about the dead. And the British Isles in particular refused to give up the ghost. In ballads, in folklore, in popular legends, spirits appeared and disappeared. And they weren't angels or demons, they were spirits. And Shakespeare tackled this head-on in Hamlet, 1603. But it's important to remember that Shakespeare's family were Catholic. I mean, hell, everybody in England was Catholic until Henry VIII and the break from Rome. You know, it's only 1534, that first Brexit, and then all of a sudden we're out. We're gone, we're off, we're doing it by ourselves, we don't need you. No. But Shakespeare probably preferred the old faith. There's lots of evidence in his plays that he did. And by bringing spirits into those stories, it was a reminder for the kind of people who went to the theatre, which was all kinds of people. It wasn't a middle-class experience. Everybody went. There wasn't very much else to do, apart from work and stabbing each other. So they went to the theatre, and there, of course, they were confronted by the things that people do believe in. Ghosts, spirits, elves, fairies, supernatural visitations of every kind. Because it seems that you don't just banish spirits, limbo, purgatory, or your dead relatives by saying so. It goes deeper than that. So not kings, not religious upheaval, not scientific materialism, or the plain fact that there has never been any empirical proof that anyone has ever come back from the dead. Nevertheless, none of this has managed to evict ghosts from their permanent ancestral home, our imagination. And there's no surprise to any of this, because death, as Shakespeare put it long before Star Trek, is the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns. You know, the earliest extant piece of literature in the world is the Epic of Gilgamesh. And it's from Mesopotamia, about 2,000 years before the Christian era. And it's about life after death. Gilgamesh is a king, and Enkidu is a wild man who becomes his best friend. It's a bromance. But after a series of adventures, Enkidu is marked for death. And after his death, Gilgamesh cannot be consoled, and he sits by the body for so long that a maggot falls out of the nostrils. Thereafter, Gilgamesh goes to seek his friend through afterlives and underworlds, including a tunnel journey in total darkness where he must run for 24 hours, aiming to beat the sun coming home. But when the sun is setting on our life, what if Gilgamesh was right? What if our only chance is to go faster, to outrun death? So perhaps that's where we are now. The finality of death might not be what it used to be. And the new challenger to death is not religion. The new challenger is much faster than that. What might outrun death is computational power. This late-come Ghost in the Machine promises that a machine can superproof your ghost. Humans will be able to upload their minds and then download it at will into a ready-made body, human or animal. Remember those myths about turning into an eagle or a fox or a fish? Or maybe you just hang out as a nobody. Chill. And for the first time in history, science and religion, those old foes, are asking the same question. Is consciousness obliged to materiality? And religion has always said no. And science has always said, dude, yes. And you know, just before Mary Shelley set off on her travels to Lake Geneva, where she conceived her novel, Frankenstein, she went to a lecture given by Dr. William Lawrence, the doctor of her husband, the poet Percy Shelley, and where Lawrence declared in his lecture that the soul does not exist. There is no, what he called, super-added value to the human. And that's pretty much been the short-form version of science versus the soul ever since. And now? Well, I'm a writer, so I think about things in terms of narrative. And I wonder if we've been telling the story backwards. That we always knew we were more than blood and bones. That one day we would defeat death, not by going to heaven or being reincarnated, but by uploading ourselves to a substrate not made of meat. I mean, it's absurd, isn't it? We're made of meat. If that were to be the case, if we could upload consciousness to a substrate not made of meat, then we would no longer haunt the living. And what it means to be alive will be much more than biological. And that should not surprise us. We are already now getting used to living around, let's call them non-biological entities, whether you're shouting at Siri, playing with Alexa, whether you've got a Google Assistant or you're already downloading software that will help you write your school essay or even your novel. It doesn't matter. This is only going to increase. You know, soon your smart fridge will be ordering your food for you. And if you're on a diet, it won't let you go in. It'll just lock you out. It will. There's already an app for this where you can be locked out of your own fridge. And then your smart assistant will say, "No carbs today, Irene." We're going to get used to it. And in a way, this is nothing new. We've always been used to it. For most of humanity, we have believed that the biological plane was only one level, one stratum, and that around us were many other levels, usually invisible but absolutely present. People believed in elves, they believed in fairies, they believed in spirits of all kinds and little people. No one thought that with the kind of arrogance we have now, that it was all about me, just me in my body, that's it. And so we're already primed, I think, to live comfortably alongside non-biological entities. And if you don't believe me, I'd like to remind you that there are billions of people in the world right now who will tell you that they are having their most significant relationship with a non-biological entity, not made of meat, not subject to the ravages of time. And I mean, of course, their sky god. So what will be the new meaning of ghost? It might be someone who chooses never to download in a physical self again. They could be aloof and cool, or they could be just irritating and threatening and downright disruptive. I mean, who wants some disembodied know-it-all coming to your party? It may be, if we were out of the body, that we might choose to go back into a body as a kind of drunken stag night holiday, you know, the kind you get in Brussels, where we could eat burgers and drink 20 pints of super strength lager and then be sick on the street. And we might look around and say, they used to live like that when they had a body. It might be some horrible holiday camp to remind us how awful it was when we were made of meat. If artificial intelligence becomes artificial general intelligence, then it will certainly not need a body. It doesn't need a body. And it will seem like the gods are visiting the humans because it will be much smarter than us. But we know that story. We've told all these stories, but we told them through religion, we told them through folklore, we told them through myth, we told them through fairy stories. And we're going to tell them through science. I think we've been telling this story backwards. But you know, the question posed by Gilgamesh, the question in the minds of our ancestors as they began to bury their dead, the question every Egyptian tomb tried to answer, the question that the religions of the world have tried to answer, that question still remains the central mystery of life. What happens after this? Of course, for those who believe that death is final, there is no mystery. Yet, none of us, when we lose a loved one, or when we too approach death, can escape that mystery. And it's only because our bodies fail and fade that death makes any sense at all. And we will live longer, thanks to advances in biotechnology, because already body parts are being 3D printed. You will be able to grow kidneys. You won't need to harvest them from others. There will be nanobots that patrol our bloodstreams, cleaning us up as we go along. 150 or 200-year lifespan is not impossible in the labs right now. This isn't science fiction. And if we stayed younger and healthier, if we didn't age, how then would we ever cope with the difficulty of death? And the lure of ghosts in the popular imagination is the lure of an answer, or at least a tantalizing possibility. And anyone who has had an encounter with the other side will know, there'll be some of you here who know, that you can't explain it. And like me, you can't explain it away. You know, back in the 18th century, the writer Samuel Johnson put it like this. He said, all evidence is against it, but all belief is for it. So, what about me? Well, when I was a little girl and I was living at home with my parents and my grandmother who was dying, we'd gone to live in my grandfather's house because my mother's mother was dying. So I didn't know this because I was a little girl, under 4. And I used to get up early in the morning, as I was generally ignored. I'm not sure why. But I used to go downstairs and climb onto Grandma's bed, which was in the main room, and with my picture books, and either read to her or point, you know, the things that little children and old people do so well together. Anyway, one morning, I was sitting with Grandma, and it was all babbling on. It was just the usual thing. And she got up, really got out of bed, and walked over to the window. We had big bay windows in Grandad's house, and she said, I'm going to see the Queen of Denmark. And she passed out through the window into the garden. And I stood looking at her in the garden, quite upright, not at all in the way that she was in the bed, looking at this long hedge, really, of roses. My grandparents, parents, and myself love roses. Looking at this long hedge of roses. And at that point, the telephone rang in the hall. My mother, Mrs. Winterson, came down, and she picked up the telephone, an old-fashioned telephone, and she said, hello, Woodfield House. That was the name of the house. And, of course, there was no one there. And I shouted to my mum, look, Grandma's in the garden with the Queen of Denmark. And Mother came in, and, of course, Grandma was in the bed, and she died. Now, the Queen of Denmark is a rose. It's a white rose. We should probably send some to Donald Trump. Every hour of the day, perhaps. It's a beautiful white rose, and we had this long hedge of them, and I didn't know that at the time. I just repeated what my grandma had said to me. I do have the Queen of Denmark in my garden at home now. It feels right. Now, that was a very vivid early memory. I am a fiction writer. I make things up for a living. That is my disclaimer. However, I am not as far as I can tell, making this up. The mind does strange things, of course it does. You know, we're all living in this world made of bone, with little sensors going outwards. I don't know, but it's clear in my mind. And following on from there, as I've got older, as I've gone on, really the supernatural hasn't gone away. And I have a house in London, which is an old house. It was built before the French Revolution. So a lot's happened there. And the oldest part was indeed a plague pit from the plague, previous to the fire of London. So it's old. And I imagine that ghosts prefer places that are older. It's when they were alive, they know what they had, and my house does look old. It is old. You know, it's got no televisions, no carpets, it's got all the panelling, it's calm, it's quiet. And there is a ghost who lives there who really annoys me because he turns the radio on. I know it's a he, because men always want attention. And he turns the radio on at odd times, but during the night or when I'm trying to wake up, or he opens the door. I close all the doors before I go to bed, and they're not easy to open. And then he'll open one and bang about with the fire irons or something downstairs in the parlour. Worse, I was in there with my girlfriend once, and I don't tell anybody about the ghost because it upsets modern people. And, of course, what he had to do, he just went and sat on the bed in the middle of the night, like thump. I don't know how, because they don't have any weight, do they? But there was this terrible thump on the bed. My girlfriend woke up thinking, oh, it's the cat, and then thinking, no, I'm in London, it's not the cat. And then I had to come clean and say, there's a ghost. What he usually does, ghosts have this thing about electricity, maybe because they are electrical, I'm not sure, but they love electricity. So his favourite thing, if I have guests there, is to set the fire alarms off. Never happens he doesn't do that to me, but if somebody comes and he doesn't like them or they're disrespectful, then the fire alarm will go off. And nobody knows what to do about it. You know, I've had people hacking away with hammers and the smoke alarms all around. So this is a favourite. So I always say to people now, when you go there, can you just go up the stairs, because it's typical Georgian house, attic, ground floor, basement, 3 principal floors. And I said, when you go up the stairs, can you please say, hello, it's me, say your name, write your name here, what a lovely home, I don't want to disturb you. And when you go, can you please say goodbye, because I don't want the burglar alarm going off either. This is another favourite. This has worked brilliantly. Everybody thinks I'm crazy, but they are sleeping through the night now. And so I just say, it's the price of the unknown. Can I explain it? No, I can't. There is also a female ghost, because she's rather mouse-like. I think she was a governess, probably in the 19th century. And sometimes when you're sitting there reading by yourself in the chair, you get a sense that the other chair is occupied. This is uncomfortable. But I am not the only person who has felt this, even though I never tell anyone. I had some French friends staying there at the London Book Fair last year. One of them said to me, really, she was apologising. She just said, is there a lady in grey in the house? And I said, yes. What do you do with it? What do you do with it? I don't know. Of course it's ridiculous. And yet these things that cannot be explained do take place. I mean, when I was little and growing up in our house, which was very poor in Accrington, the two up after we left Grandad's rather nice house, we went back to our horrible house. And of course there were mice everywhere, but Mrs. Winterson wouldn't have that because mice were what poor people had. So if ever I saw this little grey flash, I'd say, Mum, there's a mouse. She'd say, that's not a mouse, that's ectoplasm. Which is this ghostly substance that used to come out of the mouths of mediums and things. So, other people had mice, but we had ectoplasm. So it may have been that from the very beginning, and because of the way I was brought up, there was no choice for me but to live in the certainty of different planes of existence. How could it be otherwise? Because I did believe in a sky god, and with that comes everything else. We know what comes with the sky god. What's weird now, and I've looked at this on TikTok because I need to keep up, is that tons of young people do not believe in God, but they do believe in ghosts. I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't get that. I don't get that at all. But maybe that's just because I can't. If you think there's something afterwards, why would? Never mind. You can work that out for yourself. But it is the case. So there's all this the ghost hunting youth who don't think there's any final destination. Perhaps there's not, and they could just sort of move around indefinitely, I suppose, as they don't take up any space. Not sure. But I am sure that where we are now is a cusp moment for human evolution. We talked about it, didn't we? 300,000 years of humans on planet Earth, whereas the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. And what now? I mean, why do we imagine that we're not going to evolve any further? God knows we need to. It's not good. And so I wonder if we're now inventing the God that we have rejected, because AI is so much faster than we are, so much more capable in many ways than we are when it comes to processing information, managing problems, recognizing patterns. Of course, AI does not have a limbic system. In the human body made of meat, the limbic system, which rules your emotional responses, your memories, the way you react before you think, all of that stuff. Always, the neural system is there, and that is what has made us conscious. It's what's made us capable. It's also what's brought us here. But the limbic system always takes precedence over the neural highway if there's a problem. So if you think when you're afraid, you don't really think, I need to run. You just run, or you do whatever you need to do, you fight, or the limbic system kicks in, and that's what's kept us safe from predators. The neural highway is the thing that allows a moment of reflection to step in, an understanding of what we're doing. And AI, it's a series of neural networks, that's how it works. It does not run on a limbic system, so it doesn't feel the way that we do. We can teach it to feel the way that we feel. It can reproduce that feeling in words. But of course it means that AI is not going to be a feeling-toned entity in the way that we are. We don't know what that will mean as we start to live around it. People often say to me, oh, well, why are you such an enthusiast for AI? Because it's not a real relationship. It's as bad as any other parasocial relationship, that you're having with Gwyneth Paltrow, God help you, or somebody. It doesn't know you, it doesn't care about you, it seems like a relationship. Well, I'm not so sure, because most marriages, do you really feel that you're encountering a concerned other when you go home? You come in, you say, hi, how are you? What's for dinner? I don't know, I thought you were doing dinner. How are the kids? I haven't seen them for 10 years, can't find them. Personally, I'd be quite happy to go in through the kitchen door and speak to my new AI assistant, and she'd say, Jeanette, it's so great to see you. And I'd say, did you get the fridge to order dinner? Of course I did. Last year I was at a tech conference in Sweden, because I do quite a lot of tech stuff called Sana Labs, and they work on AI assistants, both for education and for you in your home. We're not there yet, but they're doing it. It's good. Some things are fantastic. Little iPal for your kids to help them with their homework, because AI doesn't get impatient, it doesn't get bored, it won't think you're stupid, it will just keep on explaining the thing until you get it. It'll sit there with your grandma who'll say the same thing 40 times over, and it'll say, that's a lovely story. Instead of thinking, how can I get out of here? Call the care home. So there are huge resources here in AI which will really help both little dudes and older people, to manage loneliness and difficulty and not feel alone and not feel like they're difficult or stupid. To me, that is a valid relationship. Right? It's not a fake or a failed relationship. When you were a kid, you had your teddy bear, didn't you, that you talked to and you told all your problems to. Right? I used to have a favourite piece of wall that I used to talk to. It was like Pyramus and Thisbe and Shakespeare, sing to this wall. But, because children live in a kind of pantheistic world where things are alive, so they can talk to them, and they love that, and they feel comforted by it. It might just be a blanket, it might be anything. We don't take that away from them. And what we're going to see in these other relationships with AI systems as they learn you, which they will, is a way of being which has always been present for people who are religious, people who go down on their knees and pray to their sky god and say, I've had a terrible day and nobody's there for me, but you're there for me, and what shall I do? You understand that. And we are respectful in those areas, and we think, whatever gets you through the night. And as far as I'm concerned, with AI, we should not privilege the human one-to-one, which is often completely inadequate or false. What we can know is that humans appear to need connection and relationship, and we may need to widen what that means and be less judgmental about whether it's a biological entity that's giving it or a non-biological entity that has learned how to give it. I mean, when you go to your therapist, do you think she cares about you once you've gone? I can say this because I was married to a therapist, so I know they don't. No, they do, but not for a week. But they hold in their mind those things that you need to say. It's a safe, held space where over a period of time, things become available to you that would not be available perhaps in any other kind of relationship. And so it is with AI. The earliest AI chatbot was called Eliza. She was in the 60s. And all she did was repeat the question, but it was still very effective. So you'd say, Eliza, I feel sad. And Eliza would say, I'm so sorry that you feel sad. And you'd say, I just don't know what to do with my boyfriend. And she'd say, I'm sorry, you don't know what to do with your boyfriend. And you'd say, it's so difficult. She'd say, it's so difficult. But it was proved, even at that basic Neanderthals way of managing, to have had a therapeutic effect on certain people who talk to Eliza. So now as we go through, we find a very different situation where sometimes people just need to talk. They need to be heard. My ex, she's great, but she said, look, therapy is not a talking cure, it's a listening cure. It's the quality of the listening that makes the difference. And my own situations alongside with AI where I've tried it out, I feel, of course we know it's not real, but God, in the world of Coca-Cola and Elon Musk, what is real? I think it's about expanding our definitions. And of course, if you work creatively, you're always expanding your definition of the real. You're always creating worlds that don't actually exist and bringing them forward to people. What for? Not just to entertain them, not just to pass the time, but to set up circumstances where, the reader, the viewer, the observer can find themselves in this other created world, which is not their world. And yet, from that experience, that encounter, there's some renewal, there's some recognition, and that is valuable. We go to art, to literature, always to try and find some clues about the thing we know so little of, which is ourselves, our situation. We're always looking for answers, and what art, creativity is so good at is not providing the answers, but setting up a space where different questions can be asked, or where we can look at the problem differently, suddenly see things in a different way. Because in life, you can be asking a perfectly good question and getting a perfectly good answer, but if it's the wrong question to ask, the good answer won't help you, and you will still be avoiding the right question, which could give you the answer that you're looking for. And sometimes we do this unconsciously because we really don't want to ask that right question. That's too scary. It's better to ask lots of perfectly decent questions, which are nowhere near where we want to go, and use the answers to those perfectly decent questions, not to get close to our struggle. And one of the surprises in art when we encounter it, again, as readers, as observers, as listeners, as viewers, is that we can be surprised into the right question. It sort of ambushes you, and you think, oh, that's what I need to be thinking about, or that is me. It's not you in your identikit situation. You know, social realism is only valuable up to a point. You don't need the you in the now. If that were the case, we would be utterly uninterested in art from the past. What could it possibly teach us? We are not those people. That is not our time. But we are interested because what we find in there from the person who's made it is some way to be ourselves privately, quietly, in a way that we can't be in other situations. You know, some of your best friends are dead because they're the people whose work you go back to that you still feel do recognise you, do know you, can understand you, are with you in some way, that continuum which passes through biological life into the life of the mind, into the life of the spirit, which is where we feel we really live, that self that's not actually the body or time or our everyday experience, the CV self, but something more mysterious, more difficult, more resistant, a little bit shy, that doesn't always come out to see other people. And that self is met through creative work as we encounter it, which is why it's never a waste of time, why it's never a luxury item, why it's never the kind of thing you do when you've done everything else, because it is the thing that allows you to be what you are, or at least to start to find what you are. There's that lovely Buddhist thing, isn't there, that we're not put on earth to dream about who we should be, but to become who we should be. And I've always believed, through my work, through the work of others, what I write, what I read, what I see, what I do, this all, for me, becomes an exercise in knowing who I am. And I'm prepared to share all of that with a non-biological life system that we are inventing for some reason now when we probably need it more than ever, because it doesn't look like we can solve our problems on our own, or at least we seem to be going back into some horrible feudal, warlike, land-grabbing greed state where few of us may even survive it. You know, the way it's looking now is as bad as it's ever been, certainly in my lifetime, because I'm one of those people who came through the golden age after the Second World War, where we had peace and a certain amount of prosperity, and we believed in progress, and that things were getting better. That world has gone. And if we want it back, we're going to have to find in ourselves the means to stand against what we see now, not to pretend that wrong is right and that down is up and that truth is debatable, reversible, that there's no such thing as facts or history, that the way we treat people doesn't matter, that there are only two genders, the other insanities that we see around us. And I think you find that strength by finding the strength from people who've gone before you, not just activists, but those who've created work where we can go to be made stronger and to remember that there is the life of the mind, the life of the spirit, that there is more to life, how much money you've got or your status in the world or how much power you have over other people, that there might be a way of looking inwards as well as endlessly looking outwards, and certainly endlessly projecting onto the other, the immigrant, the enemy, the alien, all the things that we hate about ourselves and will never, ever want to look at. So it has to be your fault, not mine. So for those of us who would rather live in a world which really is about, I suppose the mystics would have called it the progress of the soul, and that's quite a nice phrase. then we come back to this place, just as you have done this morning, to find more than what is on the outside, because life has an inside as well as an outside, and we all know that. And there are very many different ways to access the inside of life. It's just that we must do it. So what I'm going to do now, I think, is see if you've got some questions for me. Right. I think it's this way around. This is my low-tech system. Let's see if I can press it. What happens? Anything? No? Oh, look. Oh, it went off. Oh, dear. See, this is where I need a robot, and I haven't got one. Okay. Do you have a dead writer who haunts you? Whose idea of a question is that? I know you're here somewhere. No, the writers, look, when I said to you, your best friends are dead, I meant in the sense that, and I tell it to my students, when they have some problem or they're stuck with their work, I just say, go along your bookshelves. That's where the answers are. You don't need me, who's alive for now, but won't be much longer probably. You just need to go and find what it is that you want, because it's there. And one thing I do at Christmas time, which is a little speciality just for me, I love Christmas, and I don't think, I'll read my Christmas books or anything. I go into my library where there are many volumes, and I just dip in and out. I take things off the shelves. I never read from beginning, middle, and end anymore, because these are things I know. And in I go and read a paragraph, a few pages. That's the weird thing about books, because they have a beginning, a middle, and an end, but you only ever do that once. Or maybe twice. After that, you never remember in order, because the mind does not work beginning, middle, end. The mind is not an arrow, and the mind does not work sequentially, except for executive function stuff, like you generally eat your breakfast, before your dinner. But not all of us. Anyway, the mind doesn't always work sequentially, and the mind itself is more like a maze, than a highway, than an autobahn. It moves around. And so we do with the things that we love, and we mix them up, we confuse them with other things. They become talismanic. We might remember a character or an episode. Even the longest 3-volume Victorian novels condense down to something closer to poetry in the way that we remember them. And it might be a line. It might be the language, it might be the image that we carry with us. And they are talismanic because they keep us going. And, really it's like sex, isn't it? I think it's like sex. Because when you meet somebody new and you have sex with them, you really have to kind of do it in order. You can't just plunge in. Boys. No, you have to take your time. And, you have to explore. Later, it's like, oh yeah, come on, let's go. You can jump in anywhere, can't you? But the first time, you do it in order. After that, you never do it in order again, probably. So, to me, it's a kind of understanding both of how books work and how the mind works and how we can feed ourselves without having to do the whole thing from beginning to end. And strangely, and I don't know how this works, I always find just the right pages I want as I open the book. And maybe it falls open to those places, maybe. Sometimes I see things I've underlined. And they work as informal diaries, because I remember then. I thought, God, I just remember. I think, why did I underline that? What a cretin. Me, not the writer. Or something I didn't understand that I now do. So thinking about it like that, you should be haunted by the things that you have read, but only in a way that is useful to you. It's a visitation. It's not really a haunting. Let's see what else we've got. I wonder if this will work. Oh, it's a bit precarious, isn't it? I could just plunge to my doom. Oh no. I never answer that one. Right. What's next? Oh, look, it's back here. I'm not answering it. Which novel would you have liked to have ghost written? Are you kidding me? None. None. Look, it doesn't work like that. my students are always interested in the product, not the process, and that is a failure of the modern world. It's always about the end result. It's not about what it takes to get to the end result, you know. And the end result is the least interesting thing. It doesn't matter what you are, writer, painter, music. Once you've done it, even if you're an actor, once you're on the damn stage and you're doing it, you're just running the lines, aren't you? I mean, the thing is the process. The process out of getting there, that's the fun bit, and that's the interesting bit. And that can only happen, it really is idiosyncratic to you. It's your process. You know, and there's all these fucking self-help manuals everywhere and writers' manuals that try to make something which is highly individual into something which is generic, and you can just somehow buy it and apply it, and you can't. Of course, there are useful hints and clues and your friends and all the rest of it and the things you read, yes. But in the end, you know, life is a knit your own or not at all. And with writing, I know, look, it's 40 years this year since I published Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit. It's such a long time, isn't it? It's about to have another journey. I can't believe it. I wish it would go away. But it's not. It's about to have another journey of a musical. I know, it'll be fun. And then hopefully that will be, if it's not the end of it, it's the end of me, I tell you. Because, you know, it's like enough already. But I don't think of my books as individual books. I'm not there. I'm just in this long space, which is my time here. And the process of writing is all one to me. I cut them off and I sell them, but actually I'm already moving. As soon as I finish the first one, I'm already moving into whatever I've just written has taught me. Because your books are always smarter than you are. They teach you things. And then that allows you, it's these questions that we were discussing. It's not my executive function that's calling the shots here. It's something else, some inner imperative, which is suggesting where we might go next. I even do it in the plural, so it's quite close to being locked up in the madhouse. But I think all creative work is a bit schizophrenic because you are within the multiple state of yourself, not the single state of yourself, which is what the executive function is. It's how we manage most of the day. You know, it's why people get tired and depressed, because they can't really live like that. They need to be in the other self, which is the dreaming self, the wondering self, the questioning self, the self that is open, the way that kids are. You know, as well as the thing that we're all supposed to do in this dutiful Protestant fashion. So no, I don't wish I'd written anything I haven't written. I don't wish that there was a book of my own I hadn't written. I'd just like to go on a bit further and see what I can do. And if I've nothing else to say, I promise you I'll stop. Let's have a look. This is a weird thing. It's upside down. I don't know. No, we've had that. Oh, maybe I'm going backwards. Have you got another one down there? Oh, come on. I can't read. Jesus. Go away. That served me very well in life, in all circumstances. You know, you just say, go away. Okay, right. You got another one there for me. How do you choose the names for your characters? I listen to them. And they usually tell me at some point what they're called. Not all of them have names, you know, written on the body, the narrator has no name. It has to, again, you have to have an alignment. And if you're going to create a character who becomes real, you know, this is where you get to play God, because you control everything in your little world. But you have to create a character who can talk back to you and that you can start to have conversations with. Maybe this is why I find AI systems so easy, because obviously the character doesn't exist, but they start to. And so I and my characters have a chat, and sometimes they do change their names. And sometimes I don't know their names to start with, so I don't give them one. And that's also important, because you know in fairy tales that naming really is key, and if you know the name of something, you generally have power over it. This is a very ancient idea. You know, you find it in the fairy tale of Rumpelstiltskin, the poor girl, you know, who's been, in effect, sold into slavery by her stupid father to spin straw into gold. There's so many inadequate parents in fairy tales, aren't there? I really relate to that. Anyway, the horrible little goblin that sorts it all out, of course, is going to be able to steal her baby, i.e. ruin the future, because babies always represent the future in fairy tales, but the goblin can't do it because she works out his name, and that is a great thing. So you do have to work out the names, and they have to resonate and stay with you, and be your, not a friend of yours, but be someone you would always recognize, that you know them. You know them well, and you know how they speak. So that's important. And sometimes I don't know. When I wrote The Passion, which is also a long time ago, 38 years ago, God help me, I knew that the young soldier would be Henri, but I didn't know when I'd finished the first section. Section 2 starts completely differently. And I knew somebody was talking as I was typing away. And I didn't know who it was, and I didn't find out it was Villanelle until about 4 pages in. Because sometimes you just have to listen. A lot of creative work is humble. It's stepping back and letting things come in. It's not painting by numbers, it's not rote. And the more you do it, you could either become a kind of parody or a parrot, because you know so much. You've learned so much. I must have clocked the 10,000 hours many times by now. And it would be easy to just do versions of same. And I don't want to do that, because that's not process, that's product. And I need to stay in the process. And that's what keeps me alive. The not knowing is what interests me. The curiosity, and that's why I don't impose on the text. Really anything. I might have a good idea, or I might have an image, and then I'll go and start to see what comes out. But I don't know until I start to know. So I don't think that's very useful. When I tell my students things like that, they just want the answer. They don't want to hear that. They need to know. So there's plenty of books that'll help them to know. But I think of knowing really as in the Greek word, the gnosis, which is where Gnosticism comes from, which is what you know, but what you know is also has an element to it that is mystical. And, you know, if you think about the difference between magical and mystical, magic, which is the way of managing things that we couldn't manage until we got technology, is always about, you know, it's a human thing. It's imposing the self. It's about the ego. It's about controlling forces, which are both literal and not, and bending them to your will. So either ordinary, everyday things or supernatural things. So magic is very much in that space of I will get the right spell in order to control whatever it is I want to control. So it has that formula quality to it about that knowledge which can be certain and confident, whereas mysticism really isn't like that at all, because the ego comes out of it and says, I don't know, I will have to learn, and what I learn may seem like nonsense, it may be uncongenial to me, but I will just be in this space, so that the self dissolves far more than it does in a magical encounter where I'm the wizard, or I'm the sorcerer, or I'm the shaman, and I'm in control. For the mystic, you're not in control. And that's really the case, I think, in the creative process, because although you bring all your best skills to it, until it's at second draft form, you're not in control. You're learning from the thing that you are making. And for me, that works best anyway. I think we've got to go home.
Yeah.
I expect you all want to eat something, don't you?
Maybe we can
Oh, yeah, give me another one there. I mean, just let me plunge to my death. Why not once more? Given the overload of extra phenomena, virtual or digital ghosts, I have to, otherwise I will fall off. Do you have any recommendations on how to cope with them? Yes, if you have any ghosts in your house or you meet any by accident, then you must just start a conversation, because ghosts don't like being ignored. They're like you and me, okay? They want some sort of encounter which is real. They want to be recognized. I mean, this mad business of why ghosts wear clothes, for instance, when they don't have a body. They do it because they want us to recognize them. And humans are not good at recognizing non-material, non-corporeal entities. We're just not good with the invisible. You know, electricity's around us all the time. We know that. You know, the great thing is we know that we're surrounded by invisible forces. But they're not material, and so we can only know of them through their effects or through our instruments. You know, we call what we can see visible light is just a tiny part of the light spectrum. You can't see X-rays, you can't see gamma rays, you can't see ultraviolet. You know that. That is all the light we cannot see. It's there, but we can't see it. Because we're quite limited. And you know, think about your senses. A dog, 400 times better than you. A rat, 800 times more. A rat can smell a drop of chlorine in an Olympic swimming pool. You know, as sensory creatures, we're pretty rubbish. You know, we've always used our mighty minds to make the tools we need to manage the world. So if there are things out there that are coming in that as yet we can't know, we can't manage, it may be that AI is a tool, because it is a tool right now. Remember, it's not anything that is not a tool yet, and humans are tool using animals. So it may be that this new tool we're inventing will show us much more of the world than we can as yet apprehend. Not more than we can imagine. You know, we've always been great at imagining it. And all of those so-called stories, to me, are now coming back through in a far more visible form than we ever thought possible. We didn't, it seems, just make this stuff up. It seems it might actually be out there in some shape or form. So if you meet a ghost, don't be frightened, because that's just annoying. You know, it's like a dog. You just need to be calm and not show any fear. And begin the relationship. So that would be my advice. And what you should also do is buy my book of ghost stories. Because there's lots of handy hints in there for any future encounters. And also, I've got to earn a living somehow. Thank you for coming. Bye-bye. See you down there. Thank you. Thank you.